Alright, in this video we're going to cover how to create a line chart and similarly a time series chart in Google Data Studio using data from the Google Analytics demo account, which brings in data from the Google Merchandise Store. So before we get into that, let's cover the differences between a line chart and a time series chart. So if you click on this chart here, it's actually a time series chart, but you'll see options to change the chart. So of course, we're using a time series chart here, and there's also an option to choose a line chart. If you take a look at the configuration settings for a line chart that you have in Data Studio, or if you look at one of the templates that's available in Data Studio and compare the settings for a line chart and a time series chart, they're actually very similar. And I'm talking about what you will find in the data settings as well as the style settings. So what are the differences? Well, for a line chart, you can use any type of dimension for the x-axis. And of course, for a time series chart, since the data is relative to time, the x-axis will display the date or the time dimension. For example, the actual date, the day of the week, hour, minute, month, etc. Another difference between a line chart and a time series chart is if the x-axis is missing data, then the line chart will display a gap. For a time series chart, it'll show a continuous x-axis with all of the dates, but it'll give you options on how you can handle the missing data. So for example, you can bring the line down all the way to 0. Like if you're missing data for October 30th, you can just bring the line all the way down to 0, and then it'll pop back up when there is data for the next available date. Or you can do something like include an interpolation of the data, which will show you what the data might look like if there was actually data there. Now, you can also limit the number of data points on a line chart, but for a time series chart, it'll just give you all of the data for the date range that you specified. The last difference is line charts won't display trend lines, whereas time series charts will. So let's go ahead and we'll actually recreate this chart right here. And I'll show you the different ways by using a line chart and then a time series chart. So what I've done is, using this Data Studio template, I've actually copied this page. So we'll go to the page that I've copied, and then I'll click on Add Chart at the top for this drop down, and then select Line. And I will create a space for this line chart. Wait for that to load. And we'll see that it's given us a dimension for region and a metric for average time on page by default. So we'll click on region and change this dimension to date. And then select the appropriate dimension and then click on average time on page, and we'll choose page view, and then another metric for unique page views. So we'll select that metric, and you'll notice that the line chart shows us the page view and unique page view data in descending order. So it starts on the left with the date that has the most page views, and then it ranges the dates on the x-axis until the last data point where it has the least amount of page views. So what we'll do is go to the sort section in the configuration settings, click on page views, and then sort by date. And we'll choose ascending order. So then this looks pretty much the same as this time series chart. So October 19th, we have this spike here. And if we look at our chart, we have a similar spike, or we have the same spike on the same day. So you can scroll down and add any filters, segments. Now this is for segments that come from Google Analytics. But you can create these filters, change the date range, and add any additional metrics, optional metrics. For example, we can actually turn the unique page view metric into an optional metric if we want. And what this does is, if you remove unique page views from the metrics section, then by default, it'll only show the page view metric and hide the unique page views. But the viewer will be able to toggle a setting where they can select unique page views if they want to view them together. Let's look at the style section in the configuration settings, and we can see these different sections here. So you have the option to select whether you want to see the data accumulate across time, and this will give you a different view where you'll see the number of page views just rise over time. You can also elect to select whether you want to display points or data labels. I'm not going to select these options because, as you'll see, it'll just clutter up the chart. So I usually don't include data points or data labels on my chart. You can also choose if you want to smooth out the lines, and you can also limit the number of data points if you want. At the beginning of the video, we were talking about changing the number of data points. So right now it has the data points for the past 30 days. Now, if we wanted to limit that manually, no matter what the date range is that the user selects, it'll always show the number of points that you set it to. So when we do that, it changes the chart, the x-axis, to only show the dates, the number of days for the number of points that we've selected. And if we just change that back to what it was before, then we'll go back to the original chart. In the next section, we have the settings for axes. We'll keep this option selected, show axes, because that'll give us a frame of reference for the data. But there's also options to reverse either of the axes. But I'm not going to go with either one of those, and we'll just go on to the next section, which is the left y-axis. Now, I won't choose to show this either because it already has the legend here that indicates what this data is showing us. Now, if we didn't have the legend, then I would choose to show the axis title. And once that loads, it'll give us the page views, which is the metric that we chose in the data section. So you can also choose a minimum and a maximum, as well as an interval. And you can choose whether you want to show an axis title for the x-axis. But that's not necessary, and we can just keep it clean since we know that these x-axis labels are dates. The next section is the grid settings. So this first icon here is the axis color. If you want to change the color for the axis, you can do so, but we'll just keep it with the default, and this icon will change the color of the grid. So right now it's this light gray color, but I kind of want to simplify this a little more and choose an even lighter color so that it's not as noticeable. So the viewer can still see it if they do want to try to figure out, where these data points lie on the axis. But there's also this hover function which allows the viewer to see specific data points. So you can choose to make the grid transparent if you like. Then of course you can change the other settings such as font size, label font size, but since we don't have data labels, that's not applicable to us. You can also change the background and the border. And here's the section to adjust the legend. So as I mentioned before, if you want to display the title for the y-axis, you can remove the legend. So that just cleans things up a bit. That also gives you a little bit more space for the chart, or you can actually move the legend if you like. But I'm just going to keep it at the top here. And then you can adjust the alignment and the number of lines as well. Now for the chart header, what this is referring to is this little header bar with these options. So that includes the optional metrics as we looked at earlier, and then another toggle setting for the sort function. So if we wanted to sort the data by some other means, for example, if we wanted to sort by page views where we can see it in descending order, then we can change that if we like. Now we'll take a look at a time series chart. So if you're creating a time series chart from scratch, go back to this drop down, add a chart at the top, and you can select the option for time series. But if you want to convert an existing chart, you can select this drop down on the right side and then click on the time series chart option. So if we go through the configuration settings, we can see that everything looks pretty similar. So there's the date dimension, there's our page views, and we can again add optional metrics. So you can click on add a metric and select unique page views again. But before we do that, there's actually an option to use metric sliders. So if you toggle that on, I'll just show you what that looks like. And it kind of acts as a filter for the number of page views that you want to see. So if you increase the floor for the number of page views, you'll see that it won't display data for certain dates. So it's not that useful for a line chart nor for a time series chart. So we'll go back and turn this off and then add our unique page views again. Click on add metric, and once that shows up, look for unique page views. Now for the date range, what you'll notice here is it actually gives you an option for comparison, a comparison date range. So if you keep this on auto, then the date range will just match this date filter here. So you'll need to make sure that you have a date filter created for the page. But for the comparison date range, what you can do is if you select on the drop down, it gives you several options. So you can choose a fixed date range. You can choose the previous period. So for example, since we're looking at the past 30 days here, it'll just compare this data to the 30 days before this date range. Or you can select a comparison for a previous year, or choose the advanced option where you can also specify certain days. Generally, it makes sense to select previous year because many websites depend on seasonality when it comes to the number of page views and unique page views. So you can apply that setting and it'll give us another line for the previous year. So we have the dark color for the past 30 days and then the lighter color for the page views from the previous year. So these other settings are similar as well. And if we click on style, we can look at the settings here. So again, we have these settings including cumulative, show points, show data labels, and we also have this trendline option, which we can add if we want to. And again, this wasn't available for the line chart. You can add a reference line if you like. You can customize this, whether you want a reference line based on a metric or a parameter. So right now the reference line is set to 0, but we're going to remove that because we don't really, right now, we don't have the intention to compare it to an average or something like that. So if you had an average number of sales, for example, or if you want to meet a specific number for page views or unique page views, number of sales or revenue, you can use that as a reference line. And then in this general section, here's how you can handle the missing data. So by default, it'll bring the data to 0. But in this drop down, you can also see that you have the option to break the line. So it'll show a gap between the line, or you can use linear interpolation, which will show you what the data would probably look like if there was data for those missing data points. So if we keep going, we have the same settings as we did for the line chart with the x-axis and y-axis. So you can configure the settings for those respective axes. Again, there's also the sections for the grid, background and border, legend, and chart header. And there's actually a really useful feature for the header. And if you go back to data, under chart interactions, this is the last section at the bottom of the data settings. Toggle this cross filtering on. And what you'll see is this icon appear where you can actually select the range in the time series chart. And what that does is it'll actually highlight the range that you selected and update the rest of the charts on the page. So for this chart, next to it, it highlights the same date range, and then it provides the data for the same date range for the rest of these charts. If you want to show all data points again, just click anywhere on the chart and it'll bring back all the data points. Now, what we're going to do is move this unique page views metric into the main metrics section so that we can configure the lines for each of these metrics. So let's add unique page views in there, and then we'll go to the style section. So what we'll do is, for the first series, which is the first metric that we added, and that's page views, we'll change the color to match the other charts. So we'll select this orange, and if you look closely, you can see the weight of the line is a bit thinner than the lines on this other chart. So what we can do is select the drop down for this line weight and change it to 3, and that'll match the weight for this other line here. And then for the second series, which is unique page views, let's change the line weight again to 3, and we'll change the color to this so it's consistent with the other charts. So that's how you can change the settings for the lines. And we'll scroll back down, change the color for the grid to something lighter. Wait for that to update. And you can change the rest of the charts to match the same if you like. But one thing I want to point out is that on the x-axis, you'll see that's a little cleaner than what you have for a line chart. So for the line chart, on the x-axis, if you remember, it uses a date format that's a bit more long form and takes up more space. So this x-axis is a bit cleaner since it gives you dates in 3-day increments. So if we take a look at this in view mode, we can see that it matches what we wanted to recreate. So let's look at the template. So this is the chart here, the time series chart. And if we click on the second page, that's the page that I copied, we can see that it looks the same. So then you can hover over the data points and it'll show you the page views and unique page views or whatever metric you've included for the time series chart. And then you can select certain date ranges and it'll update not only the data for this chart, but also other charts and other widgets to show you the data for the same time frame. And that includes all these other charts and tables down here. So that's how you create a line chart and a time series chart in Google Data Studio. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and comment. And we'll see you in the next episode.